I think it's time to talk about the prisoner exchange, because it's big news, good news. Well, mostly good news. There's some bad news attached to this as well. So we just got gigantic news with 16 prisoners, including German prisoners and American prisoners, being released from Russian custody in exchange for 8 prisoners to the Russians, which means 24 people released from custody altogether across both sides. This includes a lot of high-profile people that have been getting a lot of attention. I'm not going to go through every person released, but we are going to go through some of the high-profile people. Paul Whelan is somebody who's been in captivity since 2018. He is a U.S. Marine. There he is right there. That has been in captivity since the Trump administration. And he, in the minds of many people, almost felt like the forgotten person in that captivity. 6 years in Russian captivity without release and without any major updates about his release. Now, we have learned, now that the deal has been made, that this has been being negotiated by the Biden administration for the greater part of 2 years now. But Paul Whelan getting out is fantastic, definitely considering he was in there for 6 years. That's a big part of his life. Look at him. He's aged. He's aged in prison, which isn't surprising considering he was separated from his family. But it wasn't just Paul Whelan who got released. It was also Evan, the Wall Street Journal reporter who was arrested in March of 2023 over espionage charges, which is the same charges that Paul Whelan was charged with. Mind you, we don't have any evidence, and the Russians have provided no evidence that Paul Whelan engaged in espionage. They have also provided no evidence that Evan engaged in espionage. In fact, them taking false allegations, throwing it at reporters, throwing it at innocent people, and using that to lock them up to turn, there's Evan, by the way, and turn them into poker chips, negotiating tools for them to get their guys out of prison, their Russian criminals out of Western containment. That seems to be the name of the game. So how it usually works is that there's a Westerner in Russia, like Evan, like any number of people, and they'll take him, they'll accuse him of espionage, or they'll find like some crime he's committed that's very minor. One person that was in captivity that was just released had 6 gummies, as in marijuana gummy bears, in a bag. And so they accused him of drug smuggling and wanted to sentence him to years in prison. And this is the same thing that happened to Brittany Griner. They found a vape pen in their bag, so they wanted to sentence her to hard labor. It's crazy, but that's what happened. And once they have these people who are in most instances innocent, they will then use them. They will use Billy the ice cream man, and they'll exchange him for Bort the butcher, the guy who like murdered 20 people in Chechnya and was arrested for committing horrific war crimes. That seems to be the exchanges that are happening. Reporters for smugglers, armed smugglers, basketball players for armed smugglers, reporters for assassins, U.S. Marines, retired Marines for other captives. And during the Cold War, this is not how it used to work. I mean, there would be instances semi like this happen every once in a while, but how it worked during the Cold War is the Soviet Union would capture our spies, and then we would capture their spies, and then we would exchange the spies if the spies wouldn't disappear in the process. And that would be that. But these aren't spies. These are reporters. These are retired Marines. These are just random Americans that are in Russia that are leading me to say, by the way, if you are an American in Russia, watch out. I would have left 3 years ago, okay? 3 years ago. So there's a question about this dynamic and facilitating this dynamic and whether it's going to encourage this behavior in the future, especially when you talk about the people that were exchanged for this. Mind you, the Germans had to make a major sacrifice for this deal to go forward. So I don't know if you guys know this, but Putin got an assassin on his side. They got specifically, one second, I had his name written down here. Vadim Krasnikov. Now, Krasnikov is a Russian assassin who he's right there on the right. He's the guy in the blue hat. Krasnikov went to Germany, went to Berlin, took out a pistol, and murdered a Georgian who had been working with the Chechens against the Russian government when they invaded Chechnya and occupied Chechnya. He then left that, went to Berlin, went to Germany to do whatever his thing is, and this assassination was done in broad daylight. He was shot, murdered, and then the assassin was put in prison. And Vladimir Putin, somebody with a history in the intelligence services, has been fighting brutally, tooth and nail, to try to get these guys, this guy out of prison. But obviously the Germans do not want to give somebody up who murdered a guy in broad daylight, literally a kilometer away from the Bundestag, from the parliament. Is it the Bundestag or is that the army? Sorry, why did I even attempt to do German? From their parliament. And so they had them detained since I believe it was 2019 or 2020. But in order to get these people home, the Russians were pretty adamant that this assassin, this murderer who murdered a Georgian in broad daylight in Berlin, we had to give him up in order to get our reporters and civilians back. And so this is the dynamic. The Germans had to make a big sacrifice here, and it wasn't just the Germans. I believe the Slovaks also gave up somebody as well. But it meant that 16 people get to go home to their families on our side, and the Russians end up getting 8 people, largely made up of intelligence assets and assassins, on their side. So when it comes to encouraging this behavior, this is the concern I have. If you are taking people who murder in broad daylight, just go out and shoot somebody in the streets of Berlin, middle of the day, with no concerns, goes to prison, and then the end result is they get to go home. They get to go home to their family. They don't have to serve the whole prison term. I mean, that guy was sentenced to life in prison. The guy was supposed to serve life in prison, and he ended up serving just a couple of years. And so if you're returning this guy over there, what does this send? What signal does this send to Russian intelligence assets throughout Europe? What message does this send to the people that the Russians are currently trying to recruit to be their intelligence assets, to be their assassins? Mind you, the Russians have tried to recruit refugees to blow up Polish railways. They've engaged in arson attacks in the United Kingdom. They've attacked factories in the Czech Republic. They've engaged in a really rapidly escalating intelligence and sabotage campaign in Europe, with even plots to attack American military bases with bombs. Like some pretty bold plans. Hell, even a plan to assassinate the CEO of Rheinmetall, one of Germany's #1 arms manufacturers, who were signing deals to build weapons not only for Ukraine, but in Ukraine. If the message is sent that you can do this, get away with it, and go home, well, then you're bringing down the stakes for somebody who's considering signing up with the Russians in intelligence, for somebody who's considering going out and assassinating, say, a Russian dissident that's living in the West. And when you look at Russian state TV and many of these outlets, and you look at the people that were exchanged, including Russian dissidents, they talk about them almost as if like, hey, you better change your identity quick. You better change your identity because we're coming for you. They might very well just go on and try to assassinate those people anyway. And so if these people can get away scot-free, go home, then is this not just going to encourage Russian assassins to go assassinate? And then we're going to be in the same situation again a few years down the line, turning over like Arnold the assassin for, Susie the rose gardener. It's absurd. But on the other hand, and this is where I'm very sympathetic to the Biden campaign, to Biden and Harris and everybody that negotiated this, Paul Whelan has been in containment for like 6 years. Are we really going to let that man rot in prison for 10, 15, 20 years? A former U.S. Marine just have his life whittle away until he dies in prison like Alexei Navalny, off of the idea that, well, at least we're not incentivizing Russian intelligence ops, is a good, if we are going to hold on to onto our spies and they're going to hold on to theirs. If we want to hold on to our like school teachers and civilians and they want to hold on to their spies, they're going to continue to do sabotage operations anyway. It's just now that those they're trying to recruit on the ground are going to have less of a disincentive. And so is having that disincentive so important to eliminate the ability for us to exchange prisoners with somebody who's taking people who are completely innocent, who should not be serving a day in prison and potentially ruining their lives? I am fine with making this deal. I come to the conclusion that helping those 16 people go home to their families is worth it. I think saving 16 lives to give up one person who murdered one person, so eliminated one life. Like, the math is not hard for me to calculate there. But on the other hand, the United States cannot just become an endless piggy bank of Russian spies exchanged for school teachers, reporters, and just random people who did not engage in espionage. And so there has to be action from the United States government to do everything they can to get the remaining U.S. citizens out of Russia and tell them very clearly that you might very well be detained. And if you're going to be in Russian captivity for 5 to 10 years, there's a chance we just can't do anything. There's a chance, depending on what the Russians are going to demand, depending on how crazy demands get, there's not much we could do. That's why Paul Whelan was detained for so long. It's because the Russian demands were out of this world. And so this is the dilemma that the West finds itself in. This is the dilemma that the United States finds itself in. And while I end up probably coming to the same conclusion as Joe Biden came to, that these people deserve to be home with their families, that does not remove the removal of disincentive. That does not eliminate the removal of disincentive. By the way, can I just say that some of these people were in such deep embeds or like in such deep spying operations for the Russian government that the kids of one of these spies that were exchanged for Putin did not know that they were Russian kids until they got on the plane to go to Russia, and they didn't even speak Russian. So when we're talking about Wall Street reporters and people who are hiding their whole lives from their families, right? The gulf here is immense. And I'm very worried about the precedent this sets, but I'm also happy that Evan and everybody else is home with their families. I also want to say that there are also others still in detainment, people who donated like $50 for Ukraine and like a charity here that are detainment, Ukrainian, Russian Americans that are detained, and tons of Ukrainian POWs who are routinely starved, tortured, mistreated, and abused in detainment, ritualistically. And the signs of that physical torture are evident on those who return. You see people go there as soldiers and come back as skeletons. And so I understand that getting rid of this disincentive is bad, but the last thing we want to do is let these people rot away forever. But there has to be another solution for this. This cannot just be an endless black hole. Let's listen to what Biden and gang had to say. Actually, I want to hear what Biden had to say about this.
Toughest call on this one for other countries is I asked them to do some things that were against their immediate self-interest, and really very difficult for them to do, particularly Germany and Slovenia. Slovenia came in at the last minute, and I tell you what, the chancellor was incredible. He was incredible.
So what's your message to other countries that may think that the Americans into their custody, unlawfully detaining them, would be a good way to get something that they want from us?
Hey, look, that's been the case for all of history. My job is to make sure that, number one, they don't get them. If they do, we get them back. I don't buy this idea that you're going to let these people rot in jail because other people may be captured. We will set out all the notifications to all the other countries, all our citizens, the countries not to go to, what to do, what not to do, and they got to pay attention. I got more work to do.
This is an extraordinary day, and I'm very thankful for our president and what he has done over his entire career, but in particular as it relates to these families and these individuals, what he has been able to do to bring the allies together on many issues, but in particular this one. This is just an extraordinary testament to the importance of having a president who understands the power of diplomacy and understands the strength that rests in understanding the significance of diplomacy.
It's fucking gibberish. I heard this earlier, and that's gibberish. I don't know what point she's trying to get across here, but Biden even looks confused. Like she had it. She could have just ended it at the importance of diplomacy. Just end it there, and it's like perfect because hey, this guy understands diplomacy. Maybe somebody else doesn't. Boom, point made. But she just I guess she wants either be in front of the camera, or she needs to extend the sentence, or She just feels like, oh, I got airtime, I gotta pump a message, but it's like she stretched it to the point of it becoming vapid. Do you think Joe hates her guts? I don't think Joe hates her guts.
And strengthening alliances. This is an incredible day. And, you can see it in the families, in their eyes, and in their cries.
When did you know you got the deal done?
A while ago. We got to make sure, we wanted to make sure everything was in place. And Slovenia made the right move at the right time. So anyway, look, it's time to trust. I mean it. I know everybody thinks I talk about the notion of relationships with foreign policy with other countries. Much of it, and you've heard me kid with Barack, kid me, all politics is personal. It matters. Other leaders trust you, you trust them, and you get things done. And that's how this got done. A lot of help. Anyway, thank you.
How worried are you that the Middle East is
I'm very concerned about it. I had a very direct meeting with Prime Minister today. And,
you get the idea. Also, there was a question about him after the prisoner swap about would he be willing to speak with Putin, and Biden had a very short response.
Vladimir Putin about this, or would you be willing to speak with Putin now directly?
I don't need to speak with Putin.
Damn. Well, that was short and sweet, wasn't it? Now, this is a great moment. It was a fantastic moment. This is a good accomplishment of the Biden administration, too. It took them 2 years to build up to this. You got to give them credit for that. Unless, of course, you are J.D. Vance. Because if you are J.D. Vance, this is actually a victory for Donald Trump somehow.
We have to ask ourselves, why are they coming home? And I think it's because bad guys all over the world recognize Donald Trump's about to be back in office, so they're cleaning house. That's a good thing, and I think it's a testament to Donald Trump's strength.
Is his job just to be the spin doctor? It's like, oh, Joe Biden cured cancer. Well, I mean, obviously, this is happening now to make Donald Trump look bad. What? Can you just not be happy? Can you just not be like, yay, woohoo? There's less Americans rotting unjustly in a foreign prison. One of the most authoritarian countries in the world. This is like not like woohoo, yay, nothing. By the way, like Donald Trump's reaction was no better. This was his reaction. There's no like, yay, woo, ha, ha. This was his immediate reaction. So when are they going to release the details of the prisoner swap with Russia? How many people do we get versus them? By the way, he says, when are they going to release the details? The details were released almost immediately. It's just he didn't Google it. They got 8 people. We got 16. Like, I'm not going to say that the deal was perfect. We gave them a guy who murdered in broad daylight in Berlin. But 8 to 16, if anyone was curious. Are we also paying them cash? No. Why would we be paying them cash? Are they giving us cash? Please withdraw that question, because I'm sure the answer is no. We could have just deleted it. Are we releasing the murderers, killers, or thugs? Yes, at least one. Just curious, because we never make good deals at anything, but especially hostage swap. So again, he can't be happy, because if he is happy, that could slightly in some way positively reflect on the current administration. So he has to be angry. It's the same way that he can't be happy about the lowest black unemployment rates that we have right now. And he has to claim it for himself, because that was his old campaign point that he would use. And now that it's true under Biden, he either claims the point still for himself and just claims the current data as his data, or he dismisses it altogether and claims it as his victory. It's impossible to ever give any credit to the current administration. Our negotiators are always an embarrassment to us. I got back many hostages and gave them, the opposing country, nothing. Mind you, Paul Whelan went into custody under the Trump administration. So during the Trump administration, innocent Americans were still being taken hostage, and he left office without solving the situation. Biden then comes into office, and then he gets Paul Whelan out. That's the timeline, just saying. To do so is bad precedent for the future. That's the way it should be, or this situation will get worse and worse. They are extorting the United States of America. They're calling the trade complex. That's so nobody can figure out how bad it is. Or this just probably means why you don't understand it. Now, I will say there's one thing about Donald Trump's response and J.D. Vance's response to this that I find fascinating, because it does not seem to match what he used to say about these prisoner swaps. Because before, instead of being such a Debbie Downer about the whole thing, he was excited about the potentiality of a prisoner swap, but he was also positive that the only way a prisoner swap could happen was that if it was Donald Trump doing the prisoner swap. And so that it couldn't happen under the Biden administration. Here's the clip.
Evan Gershkovich, the reporter from the Wall Street Journal who is being held by Russia, will be released almost immediately after the election, but definitely before I assume office. He will be home. He will be safe. Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, will do that for me, and I don't believe he'll do it for anyone else, and we will be paying nothing. Biden likes to pay massive numbers. We will be paying nothing. Thank you very much.
It aged like milk. Okay, look, I don't want to like take this moment to like curve off the road and start Trump bashing, but when you say this and then follow it up by being such a prissy, like oh God, well, how many people a week? It's just a bad look. It's a childish look. It's an immature look. And I don't know, just be happy. They got home. Yippee, yay. He seemed like it was a good goal for him then, but then we achieve it and it's a bad thing. Do.